that was a little bit of an example from Jens Larsen's book, Modern Jazz Guitar Concepts. So the very last example in the book is a blues where he kind of applies all the things he talked about in the book and explains. So it's tabs and notation and analysis with the explanation of all the scale choices that has been covered in the book. So I'm pretty sure most of you are, or if not all of you, are aware of Jens Larsen. He's kind of the guru of online YouTube jazz guitar teaching, and you've probably seen some of his videos. He's got tons of videos, obviously very high quality content. So I'm gonna go over this book. I have his approval. He might not remember because I got this book more than a year ago and then I kind of forgot about it. I think he's got 2 books out and this is one of them. And I got the approval from him to cover this book, but as I said, it was a long time ago, so it's good for a couple of reasons. First off, it's a method book. I really like that. So it's also very good for teaching. So basically, what he's doing, he's taking a 2-5-1 progression and showing you the scales. So he introduces the different scales in steps. So you start with less complicated scales with less extensions or altered extensions. And then he introduces the more difficult scales, the altered scales and half whole scales later on, which is a really good idea. There are a couple of other reasons why I think this book is really good, as we shall see. It also never ceases to amaze me that you can find ideas that you haven't thought of. I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and as you know, I have tons of books and I love jazz theory, but there's always 1 or 2 things in a book like this that I have never thought of. So I'll share that with you because I don't think this book is really aimed for me. It's more for somebody who's learning to play jazz, I think. But there was some ideas in here that got me really surprised, that got me thinking like, I never thought about that. So I'll share that with you. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I shall do an unboxing of another book that I bought because my students tell me I need to do more unboxing because that's what the kids do these days. And I also made a little etude with some of those licks that I got from this book and I modified them a little bit. So we're gonna use those over the tune Pent House. So all that and more, let's get started, shall we? The first thing he talks about is just diatonic major scale. So you can play over a 2-5 in C major just using the C major scale, right? Which creates a D Dorian and a G mixolydian and a C major 7. I can just play C major over this, right? So that's a good place to start. But the problem with this is that I'm kind of just noodling, right? This is what's missing when I get a student that is new to jazz. They can play, the scale, but they don't know what the notes they are playing, how they relate to the chord they're on at that very exact moment, right? And that's not gonna work. It works in this case, but it's not gonna work when the tunes get more complicated and they start changing keys. You need to know exactly what chord you're on and how the note you're playing relate to that chord. And that's why we practice our arpeggios in different ways. I've talked about this in many videos. And we practice our scales. So you could think D Dorian, G mixolydian, C Ionian. But maybe it's easier to just think C major over the whole thing. It's also very common to ignore the D minor and just think G7. So G mixo. So here is an example of how you can play a lick using these scales, just Dorian and just a mixolydian over the G7. And then more slowly. So he'll play the examples twice, one at tempo and then a slower version. So that was a lick just using those scales, or C major. But there's some devices in here, there's triads. That's a stack of fourths, so it's kind of modern. So we shouldn't dismiss just using the mixolydian scale. You can still make it sound modern and hip by using like different chordal structures and stuff like that, which is really good with this book. It's also like telling you in what kind of style he's kind of drawing the inspiration from, so you can check out guitar players that do that. Then you need to be aware of what are the extensions. If you play mixolydian, you have the notes of the chord, and then a regular ninth, and then 11, and the 13. And that 11th is in a kind of a void note if you're playing over a regular G dominant chord. But you have a 13 and a 9. So you need to know what chord the different scales correspond to, which is of course explained in this book. Then there's a whole bunch of licks here that I'm not gonna play them because I don't want to give away the content of the book. I'm just telling you that there's a lot of licks. I think there's like audio, there's like 80 downloadable audio examples, so that gives you an idea of how much stuff is in here. Here's one, I put a little note like I like this one, I mark the ones I like. That's also a chordal structure. Then he talks about chromatic enclosures and how to use chromaticism to spice it up without even introducing the altered scales. We're still using just the major scale, right? But we're adding chromaticism in different ways. So I stole one lick and applied it over Pent House. The lick goes like this if we're in A minor. So it's an A minor arpeggio, go up to the ninth, and then I'm doing kind of like an F sharp minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, down the scale, then thirds. Very standard jazz language. So that happens twice, right, in that tune. Then we go to D minor. There I did the Barry Harris pivot. I just drop an octave instead of going. Which is high, I just drop that C. So I found a YouTube backing track that I'll link to of Pent House, and I will play this little etude with you. Here we go. So of course, if it's too fast, you can slow down. You can use iReal Pro or whatever to slow it down. Then I would suggest that you practice only using that scale. And then you could just also, if you make your own backing track, make sure that you're playing those extensions in the chord when you're comping. So a 9 chord, a 13 on the dominants, so that you kind of get used to the idea of you hear that chord, those extensions, and you know what notes relate to that, so you can play the corresponding scale. So then you hear altered chord, sharp 5, sharp 9, you know, aha, altered. You don't even have to think about it. I know you hear me talk about ear training all the time. It's very important that you understand these scales from an ear training perspective. So the next scale he talks about, it's a little bit weird in my opinion. He talks about harmonic minor on the 5 chord. So basically the mixolydian flat 2, flat 6, I like to call that scale. Also here people call it Phrygian dominant or even Phrygian major to play this scale. Which would give you a flat 9 and a sharp 5. But to me that scale belongs to minor. I never think of that scale in the major tonality. But let's try it anyway. So I'll make a better loop here. I'll do it as a bossa and I'll play a sharp. No, I'll play a diminished chord, like an F diminished over G. If you have that flat 9 chord, I guess. Be the diminished scale too, like the half whole, but let's say you would play something like this. That's a very cliche bebop lick, right? That's a diminished arpeggio. That could be derived from this scale, but I don't think of it like that scale. I just think of that as a diminished arpeggio. Because it's not altered, right? Because there's a D in there. He also goes over all the different arpeggios and triads from each scale. You also get that G augmented triad from that scale, which is really nice, but you also get that from altered, right? So here is an example of what I'm talking about. Like let's say you have a 2-5 in F. My next page in my pent up house etude is that lick. So it starts on the 5th. Then we go to D minor 7. Modify it a little bit. Because those 2 5s are not resolved, right? So I have to change it up a little bit. Alright, let's try that one. So then you would do the same thing, try to improvise over that tune at whatever tempo you feel comfortable with, only using that scale over the dominant chords. And this time you can play a sharp 5 chord, flat 9, but not sharp 9, because there is no sharp 9 in this scale, right? But the idea here is that it's very difficult for the student trying to learn how to play over jazz tunes to play all these altered chords at the same time. So the teacher will make this mistake like, yeah, you know, when there's a dominant chord, play the altered scale. And then, you know, let's try to play There Will Never Be Another You. And if it's actually very difficult if you're gonna hit all those sharp 9s, sharp 5s, flat 5s over all the dominant chords. It's too much. The student's probably gonna feel very frustrated because he or she can't, you know, think about all those extensions at the same time. So you wanna get some music happening. So that's why it's a good idea to play at first. Don't do the extensions. Play the regular mixolydian and just think of the major scale. Then introduce like the flat 9 so that you don't give them the altered scale right away. Introduce it gradually, kind of like when you join the Church of Scientology, right? You'll get the information when you're ready for it. That doesn't mean I think you should join the Church of Scientology. It was in this chapter that I got kind of surprised. He talks about you can actually find 2 triads in this scale. The 2 triads you can use are D diminished and E flat augmented. Both those triads you can find in this scale, right? That's an unusual triad pairing that I never used. So triad pairing I've talked about a lot. We usually do major triads when we talk about triad pairing, triad pairs, because those are the strongest sound, but this is a really cool triad pair. So if I D diminished, E flat augmented, then I just go up the inversions. The augmented is always the same, right? The triad is also really cool. So that's also something you can do. Just take a triad like that and work with that, or a triad pairing. Again, D diminished, E flat augmented. Love that. Next chapter is the altered scale. I've talked about the altered scale before. I have a video called The Altered Scale, and I also talked quite a lot about it in the Mike Stern book, which is the same publisher, I think, right? Fundamental Changes. So just like the Mike Stern book, he'll do all the arpeggios from the altered scale. We have G altered, the triads, or the arpeggios. So here's an example. A 2-5-1 in E flat major. So again, I'm just showing you one lick out of like many. So here's a A flat arpeggio, A flat major 7 arpeggio. That's a sharp 9, flat 9. So that's altered, right? Because there's a sharp 9 there. So let's steal that and use it over Pent up house, shall we? It's gonna sound like this. Here I'm just stopping there because, again, it doesn't resolve. You want to be careful with the altered scale when the dominant chord is not resolving. It can sound good even though the chord is not resolving, but usually not. Same thing here. You practice using only the altered scale. Again, when you make a backing track for yourself, play some chord that has this altered, like sharp 9, sharp 5, so that you get used to hearing that altered sound. You can actually go in, if you use iReal Pro, I know a lot of you use iReal Pro, you can actually go in and edit and change to like a chord symbol that altered or whatever you want. That's a good idea because then you really get those sounds into your system. And then try to improvise not using licks. The licks is kind of just to get you started, right? Then you want to create your own licks, write your own licks, transcribe own licks, and ultimately you want to be able to play without using licks. Licks is just a way of kind of getting started and learning the language. You need something. You need some kind of ammunition to make it through the changes. The more licks you learn, you're just gonna start combining stuff and instinct takes over and you just kind of play what you hear. Ultimately, that's the goal. But I think it's a very good idea to learn licks, but don't forget to write your own licks. You could also change in iReal Pro the meter to, let's say, 3/4 or an odd time signature like 5/4. Then you can't play the licks. The licks doesn't fit, so you have to kind of alter it somehow, which is really good. Last chapter is the diminished scale, or I call it the half whole, which is the most difficult to get into your system, I think. It's an 8-note scale with a major 13 and a flat 9 and a sharp 9. So they have all this, because it's symmetrical, you can do all this crazy stuff with it. If you're new to diminished scale, you might want to spend some time just getting to know that scale. So I had a teacher at Musicians Institute who said that he would take like a week where he only played that scale, because you need to spend extra time with this scale to get the sound into your head. One tip that I've talked about before is to start on the D. So if I have a 2/5 in C major, I start on the D and play a minor scale, 4 notes, and then I go up a half step, and play those 4 notes as a minor scale, right? So D minor, A flat minor. That's the easier way to hear the scale, I think. modern sounding and very hip. So let's listen to a few. That was sloppy. Let me try that slower. There are tons of licks like that. So there are these triads hiding in the scale, right? So if you play a G13 flat 9, there's this E triad. Because it's symmetrical, there are 4 major triads. E, B flat, no sorry, E, D flat, B flat, and G major. So they're minor third part. Could be minor too. But the major has a stronger sound. So it can do all that crazy stuff. Like Michael Brecker would play stuff like that. It's a bit much to use all the 4 of them, but you could do triad pairing with, let's say, E and B flat. That's really hip, right? If I have a G13 flat 9 chord, I play E triad and a B flat. So we'll take a lick like that. This is going to be the last example. Oh yeah. That's D triad over the D and A flat. That's a tritone away, right? I could keep going with those triads. Alright, so I have these etude. The etude I made is on my Patreon page, but again, that's just the idea is just to get you started with that. I want you to come up with your own. You could take licks from a book and write your own etudes, modify them so after your own taste, but ultimately you want to write your own licks and transcribe licks, right? Because it's about learning a language. And the book is Modern Jazz Guitar Concepts. As always, I'm just scratching the surface. There's so much more, but I think you get an idea of how the book is kind of set up. It's goes through the different scales, introduces the more difficult scales, and there at the end there's that blues where everything is being used, and there's an explanation with analysis. All right, so let's open up this package here. I don't know if this qualifies as an unboxing. It's more of unpackaging, I guess. I'm a little bit worried. I'm excited about this book, but a little bit worried because it's very thin. Doesn't feel like a very... All right. It's the Chris Potter Jazz Styles, Scale Exercises and Contemporary Jazz Line Phrases from Transcriptions for All Instruments by Olegario Diaz. So again, I'm butchering his name. Olegario Diaz. I've seen this these books and this author in some Facebook group or something called jazz theory resources or something, and I've been very intrigued. But I think he's got a whole bunch of books. This was the only one I could find, and this is the one I wanted the most because I'm a huge Chris Potter fan. And yeah, so this is I think a saxophone oriented book. So oh man, yeah, this looks very interesting. I hope it tells you what solos is taking. Okay, so it could happen to you. Best line phrases. It takes phrases and makes them into kind of patterns. All right, so this I'm gonna dive into this right away. But that the topic today was this book, and as always, I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.